A lot of students these days are applying for testing accommodations to maybe get extra time on the exam or get some other special considerations. I'm wondering about walking through students through that process. How do you typically evaluate students for things, in particular like ADHD? What goes into that?
Well, here's the thing, Steve. As you know, we have been very opinionated and thoughtful about ADHD for many years. I mean, one of the problems that I think that goes on with ADHD is that, in fact, it's for want of a better expression, dance card diagnosis. It's a fashion show diagnosis. And a lot of the people who are listening intuitively know that because they're like, hey, it's not a big deal. I mean, I can take these stimulants. I mean, the whole thing of what's going on in secondary education with stimulants is pretty amazing. And I think one of the reasons there's so much irresponsibility going on with the diagnosis and with the use of medications in general, forget the test itself, I'm talking about the overall big picture, is the fact that the diagnostic criteria are so ridiculously amorphous. So, Steve, you know as well as I do, if a person is hyperactive or inattentive, it's a visual, it's an appearance, it's a behavioral diagnosis, not a brain function diagnosis. And what your listeners need to think about, what your blog readers need to think about, is what am I actually dealing with internally, not what am I dealing with externally. And that's something we can really elaborate a little bit on. I'll just take a moment of your time on this, because how a person looks, as you know very well, is not who they are. Okay. They can, now, if a person is a quote unquote flamer who has an obvious deterioration, then they will be able to be identified pretty quickly, and they're struggling, and they've probably already been identified and taken some medication to deal with hyperactivity or inattentiveness if it's obvious. The problem that so many individuals have because of the inadequacy of the diagnostic coding system, and it is painfully inadequate, they don't really know what their problem is, because they're bright in many aspects of their lives. They're great conversationalists. They can read the things that they're interested in, but when it actually comes down to organizing their thoughts and putting things down on paper and actually staying focused over a period of time, they can have a problem oftentimes, and you'll get a kick out of this, oftentimes because they're thinking too much, not that they have a deficiency, but that they have a cognitive abundance. They're thinking too much. And so what happens is sorting, when you go into a test like this, by far the greatest, the most predominant presentation of executive function challenges, which is the new word for ADHD. ADHD is really, in my opinion, 20 years out of date. I mean, and why is it out of date? Because the science, the neuroscience activities are based on brain function, and everybody that's on the internet that's talking about it, discussing it, every single person from Dr. Ned Hollowell on down, the guy who wrote Driven to Distraction years ago, Russell Barkley down at University of South Carolina, all the guys are really looking at brain function diagnosis and brain function diagnostic criteria rather than appearances. Now, let's just take a moment to tease that point apart a little bit. So a person can say to themselves as they're listening and thinking about what we're talking about here, what is my problem? I'm not hyperactive. I'm a little impulsive once in a while. I mean, if I drink a little too much, I can get pretty rowdy, but that's not my problem every day. I do really well in most things, but I really do have a thing of completing tasks. Now, one of the things that I think is so important is that we actually, since we're looking at brain function, is we look at executive function, which is the way a person actually thinks rather than the way they behave. So one of my constant reminders is that folks were treating thinking problems. This is international. This isn't just you and me in Brooklyn and Virginia Beach. This is what's going on in the world globally. We're treating thinking problems, my friends, without thinking about thinking. This is abhorrent, in my opinion.
So I'm sorry.
No, please, dig right in.
I was just going to ask, so what you're saying is that if this is a external behavioral problem for a lot of students and they're treating it with medication, that seems to be a bit of a disconnect where they're not really treating the actual issue. Is that where you're going with this?
Well, I will take one step. It's an excellent question. It is slightly a disconnect in the sense that the targets are somewhat helpful. That's why I said inadequate. So a person who takes meds for behavioral disparities, for hyperactive or inattention, it can actually help the person control those two behavioral traits. But the other additional secondary benefit is that it should adequately control and help and assist and support the thinking process. And most of the time it does. So as a result, a lot of those folks are treated adequately and sufficiently because they're actually able to manage the thinking process. Let me answer it in a different way, and that is, so what are the targets of thinking if we're really looking at thinking? Well, disorganized thinking has three different things going on. One is the possibility of acting without thinking. That is the behavioral part. But the other two are thinking without acting. This is the most frequently missed subset in the entire universe of executive function. And I call it attention abundance disorder because a person has so much on their mind, and if they've really prepared, they've got 1,000 things on their mind. How can I get it organized to do the job on the test? So that attention abundance disorder is a manifestation that is uniformly missed. I mean, I can't tell you, I've done thousands of second opinions. Person comes in, we go over their whole thing, and first of all, the medication hasn't been adjusted correctly, which is a whole nother heartburn, which I won't bother you with unless you have some specific questions about it, because it's so easy to do. But more than that, they haven't been targeted in terms of what they're trying to fix. So they still suffer from unmanageable cognitive abundance, and they haven't actually pulled their thoughts together in some orderly way. And the second one that's missed, neither of these are in the diagnostic, the current DSM-5. They're not in the current DSM-5. The second one is avoidance, which really is interpreted over to procrastination. So what happens is the timing is off. If a person's thinking without acting, then they have the additional presentation of I'm not going to think, I'm not going to act, I'll get it to in a minute, give me a break, I'll talk to you later. Well, that whole avoidance thing in the outdated dance card diagnostic system is called a personality disorder of all things. I mean, can you imagine that? Avoidant personality. And so all these individuals that have these different problems then wind up then not being treated correctly. You know, I hear the binging in the background, and I realize that I didn't turn my email off, and I'm turning it off, Steve, so you won't have to hear the bonging in the background.
It's okay, no problem.
So, but I don't know if that's helpful, but that's really a very key point, because then if your listeners have a clear target, they're much more likely to be firmly adjusted in the medication adventure that they're on, or they can then identify that, hey, they do need some help because they do have unmanageable cognitive abundance, which I loosely term cognitive anxiety, which is mental anxiety, as in distinction to affective, emotional, somatic, feeling anxiety down in your chest or your stomach. So chest and stomach anxiety is a different neurotransmitter system entirely, mainly serotonin. Whereas cognitive thinking, worrying, fretting, analyzing, disorganization, that is predominantly dopamine, which is then treated by the stimulant medications. So that's a quick breakdown on targets.